The comma is undoubtedly the punctuation mark that gives people the most trouble. So I want to try to clear things up here. First thing to understand about the comma is that really the comma does two very different kinds of jobs. The first kind of thing a comma does is simply to join elements in a list. For example, it has a big, bold flavor with a comma between big and bold. Big and bold. Big and bold are both adjectives. They are grammatically equivalent. And the comma between them is simply functioning as a substitute for the coordinating conjunction and. It has a big and bold flavor. So any comma that is functioning like this, it's simply joining elements in a series, and hence is called a serial comma. That's serial with an S, right, from series. So it has a big, bold flavor. So here are two adjectives joined by a serial comma. Serial commas are lone wolves. They act totally independently of anything else. They're just like little words. They're just like and in a sentence. So we need stamps, squill, squid, and wax. Here's a list. Now this time a list not of adjectives, but a list of nouns. Stamps, squill, squid, wax. These nouns are all grammatically equivalent, and even though there's more than one comma here, each of them is working by itself. Stamps and squill and squid and wax. So this is the serial comma, and that's really all I'm going to say about that. There are a few little tricky situations with it, but it basically is not very complicated. Now, the more tricky use of the comma is when it's not functioning as a serial comma. And here, the thing that the comma does is sets off parts of a sentence that are what we call non-restrictive. Don't get alarmed. I'm going to explain this. But the thing to keep in mind here to start off with is that the serial comma works alone. This other kind of comma really is sort of like parentheses. And as you know, parentheses work in pairs. And this kind of comma, when it's performing this function of setting off certain parts of the sentence from the rest of the sentence, this kind of comma also works in pairs. Let's take an example. Electricity, which can shock you, is useful. Electricity, which can shock you, is useful. Now, the element that concerns us here is this subordinate clause, which can shock you. Now, the thing to ask yourself, let's make use of a Venn diagram. Okay, here is a set that represents electricity. This is everything that is electricity. It's inside that circle. Now, if I were to ask you, what does the set electricity which can shock you look like in relation to this set? You would say, well, in fact, it's exactly the same. It overlaps the set electricity because there is no electricity that can't shock you, right? All electricity can shock you. So, the set electricity which can shock you is identical to the set electricity. And that means that this which can shock you does nothing to further define what we're talking about. Once you say electricity, you have adequately defined what we're talking about. Consequently, this subordinate clause is not essential to the meaning of the sentence and should be set off with commas. let's look at a contrasting example, because this is indeed difficult if you've never had this explained to you before. Pitchers who are left-handed are called southpaws. Now, the clause here, who are left-handed, is in a corresponding position to this one, and I would ask, okay, is it acting the same way? Is it adding anything to our definition of pitchers or not? Well, let's look at the Venn diagram again. Suppose this is the set of pitchers. This represents all pitchers. What about the set pitchers who are left-handed? What does that look like? Well, indeed, that is a subset of pitchers. So think what who are left-handed has done. It has restricted the meaning. We've gone from pitchers to pitchers who are left-handed. And therefore, who are left-handed has further restricted, further defined what we're talking about. And for that reason, who are left-handed would be called a restrictive element. And restrictive elements must not be set off by commas. These kinds of things, though, like which can shock you, in the phrase electricity which can shock you, it does not further restrict the definition of electricity, and therefore it is called non-restrictive. And non-restrictive elements must be set off with a pair of commas. So that is the first thing to grasp and memorize, that restrictive elements must not be set off with commas, and non-restrictive elements must be set off with commas.